Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today, we're going to do a weekend review for June 15th through the 17th, 2018. It was a big weekend at the box office. We will walk through the top 10. There's a fair amount of new releases this weekend. Not all of them did very well. So we'll walk through those, maybe briefly talk about some limited stuff that's going on, and then dive into what is going to be coming out over the next couple of weeks. So number one this weekend, of course, was Incredibles 2. I knew going into this weekend that the tracking on this was too low. The buzz for this movie was off the charts, and it was one of those films that, like, the original Incredibles, I saw it opening weekend whenever it came out. God, it was like 14 years ago, wasn't it? And it was just, I remember seeing it opening weekend, and I remember the reaction from the people around me, and it was abnormally gushing. Like, there is something about the original Incredibles movies that is so close to so many different people's hearts. They're ecstatic about this movie, and that following came out in November 2004. I had to look it up because I couldn't remember. That following for this film never really went away. It was always one of those movies where if you brought it up over the last 14 years, people would just go on and on about how great it was and how much they loved it. It was never that movie to me, so it was always a little bit weird, the sort of ecstatic positivity about this movie. But it was so clear with most of the people that I know that you've ever talked about this movie. It was definitely them gushing over it. And so when the second one was announced and it was coming up, it was pretty clear to me that based on what was happening this summer, you know, we had this big pop off with Avengers Infinity War. Then you had, you know, Deadpool 2 did pretty well. It wasn't really a flop. We'll get to that and how it's doing now. Solo was definitely a flop. And there was just a little bit of a lull that seemed to happen here in June. And it felt like the timing was right for something to really take off. And that's when Incredibles 2 came around the corner and really hit a grand slam here. So the official numbers are in today. They came this afternoon. For the weekend, Incredibles 2 did $182.7 million. In its first opening weekend. That was in about 4,400 theaters. That's a massive wide opening, by the way. I got to check and see where that is in the all-time list in terms of number of theaters. Per theater average was a crazy $4,100, almost $4,150 per theater. Just kind of like, you know, Disney's obviously super happy that this happened after Solo kind of tanked a few weeks ago. Or a month ago, I guess now. That's crazy. It's been 4 weeks. This is an outrageously fantastic opening. If you want to put it in perspective in terms of what other Disney Pixar movies have done, let's just take a brief little review of what's happened over the last few years for Pixar. So obviously Coco came out last fall. That opened up at 50. It ended up at 209. So Incredibles 2 will hit the total take for Coco, which wasn't that long ago. It'll hit that total take domestically, at least, probably, I guess, by the end of this week, maybe midweek. I'm not sure how it's going to do over the weekdays. But it'll definitely be over that hurdle, small little hurdle for Incredibles 2, by next weekend. So it's already, you know, just completely destroyed the last Pixar movie. Cars 3 opened up at 53, closed out at 51, 52. That was not a good release for Pixar. I remember that. That was last summer. The summer before that, Finding Dory, who, of course, is also a Brad Bird movie. Brad Bird is Iron Giant, The Incredibles, Ratatouille, Mission Impossible, Ghost Protocol. Yeah, whatever. Tomorrowland, which was a flop. Pretty massive flop, actually. And so he came back for Incredibles 2 and has really just done a phenomenal job here. But finding, what was I saying? Oh, yeah, this is the problem. I get Andrew Stanton and Brad Bird mixed up. I was thinking that somehow Brad Bird did Finding Dory. He didn't do it. It was Andrew Stanton. Andrew Stanton is famous for being like this amazing director for animated films, and then he tried to do John Carter in 2012, and it was like, it's considered to be the one of, if not the worst flop of all time at the box office. Anyway, so it's not Andrew Stanton. This is Brad Bird, who did the original Incredibles. I'm not going to go back and edit that out. We're keeping it live, folks. So Brad Bird did his last movie was Tomorrowland, which was a flop. That's also why I get them confused, because it's like you have these two guys who have done incredible work in animation and Pixar films, and then at the same time they try to do live action and it completely falls flat. For Andrew Stanton, it was John Carter. For Brad Bird, it was Tomorrowland. For whatever reason, their style does not translate over to live action. In any event, going back, looking at Pixar, Coco did really well, closed it at 209. Cars 3 didn't flop, but definitely underperformed at 152. In this summer of 2016, we had Finding Dory do 135. I think that was the comp here for Incredibles 2. I think a lot of people were thinking that a Finding Dory-esque opening was in the cards for Incredibles 2, and it blew that movie out of the water. Just keep in mind that this 182 for Incredibles Dose is the best animated opening of all time. It's the 8th best opening weekend of all time. It's the best PG debut of all time, besting Beauty and the Beast, which was 174.7 to be exact. So it's obviously a massive record breaker, top 10 opening weekend all time. And if you compare it to Pixar hasn't had a movie open like this ever in its history. You had Finding Dory at 135. You had Toy Story 3 at 110. That was 8 years ago when that opened. They really loved this time period, by the way. It's like the third week of June. They're obsessed with it for some reason. They must have carved this out for, going back about to Ratatouille. So over 10 years, they've really carved out this weekend as their spot to release a big movie. Ratatouille, also Brad Bird, by the way, which I think personally, a little sidetrack, I think Ratatouille is my favorite Pixar movie, which maybe is weird. I guess some people think that it's the best one. Inside Out was obviously fantastic, but for me personally, I think Ratatouille is not only just animation, not Pixar, one of the best written movies I think I've ever seen in my life. Just beautifully done. Just a wonderful film, and it seems like Incredibles 2 is definitely is up there in terms of quality and what people are thinking about it. A+ cinema score, pretty decent, somewhat common for Pixar films that do well with that A+. Try and get an A+ if you're not animated, and that's the really tough thing to do. But it's clear here that from the critics, which gave it a 94% Rotten Tomatoes, and from audiences, they are absolutely loving this film, just like the first one. 89% score on Rotten Tomatoes from the audience. Again, take that with a grain of salt because it is open voting. But you can't argue with the A+ cinema score. So if you're thinking about where this thing is going to end up, and if we want to compare it to other Pixar movies, Finding Dory ended up at 486 total. This is going to blast through that, especially with that A+ cinema score. And the fact that critics love it as well. I think you're looking at a minimum, an absolute minimum, 182. Let's give it a 3x multiplier. Minimum 550. So the basement here, I think, is 550. It could go higher than that, but my guess is that the opening weekend is so high that it might be slightly inflated in terms of that. So it's multiple. For a children's film, 3x is pretty normal as a multiple. In the average film, more like a 2.7-ish to 3x, a little bit lower. But I don't see this dropping below 3x. The quality suggests that it's gonna really push the limit here for a movie that opens at 182. Its multiplier really gonna push it. I think 600 is gonna be pretty easy. I'm going to assume something crazy. It's not crazy for an animated film, but crazy for a movie that opens $182 million. 3.5x multiplier, you're looking at 637. That seems pretty good to me. I would guess probably around 625 total domestic. That would put it well beyond Finding Dory's 486. And I think looking back, let's do adjusted, because I feel like we're... of course, Box Office Mojo freaks out when you try to do adjusted stuff for whatever reason. It's obviously going to be the best performing Pixar movie of all time. which shouldn't be, I guess, that surprising. The fact that it's a sequel, maybe that multiplier dips down a bit, but I don't see how it goes anywhere below $600 million. And that's, 120 ahead of Finding Dory all time. So, a fantastic performance for Incredibles 2. I expect it to not drop that much over the next few weeks. It's really wide open at the box office for a while here, especially for the children's film. There's not a lot of other children's films that can compete with something like this, so it's gonna be in a pretty much a low simmer for the next 2 months. Talked about the A+ Cinema score. I think the one thing here that stood out, and Deadline called this out, and a lot of people called it out on the forums, that is the box office nerd forums, to be specific. One thing that people called out was that this played more like a 4-quad movie than a normal animated film. And what that means is, if you think about the 4 quads, if you don't know what that means, it is men under 25, men over 25. Those are 2 quads. Women under 25, women over 25. The 2 other quads. So when a movie plays, when you have a 4-quad title, it means it's playing to all genders and age groups well. In order to get 180 or like a $200 million opening, you have to do that. Like a Star Wars film is a 4-quad movie. Jurassic World was a 4-quad movie. Avengers was a 4-quad movie. So Incredibles 2 is playing more like a massive, huge tentpole MCU, Jurassic World, Star Wars type film. Which I think is what surprised a lot of people. Did not surprise me at all. I knew that going into this weekend that this was going to play like a 4-quad massive movie. This wasn't going to cap out at like 110 or 120. Like there was just too much attraction to every age group here to see this movie. Because you got to think about it. Obviously, parents are going to take their kids, but the original came out, 14 years ago? So anybody who is like younger now, who's older, they saw it when they were like a teenager or as a kid, and now they're an adult, and like they're gonna go back for the nostalgia trip, right? So it really was perfectly formulated to be a massive opener. In terms of data on this, Deadline posts this stuff, so if you have a chance, take a look at their weekend review for the box office. It's a really good read always. Under 25 was 66% of the audience. Over 25 then was 34% of the audience. Makes a lot of sense. Pretty evenly split between female and male. 51% female, 49% male. The definite recommend score was 83, which is very high. The positive review from Post-Track was 93%. 93% of the people who saw this loved it. So, I mean, it's, what can you say about this? It's a big win for Pixar. Coco was an amazing movie, really interesting, but a little bit of a niche, I would say. A little bit more on the artistic side, if that makes sense. Incredibles 2 is just a popcorn movie. It's a popcorn blockbuster for all ages, despite the fact that it is animated. And it's just a huge win for Disney after the disaster that was Solo earlier this month. So we'll see how it plays out. Obviously it's a record breaker across every single category you could possibly think of. But that I'm really fascinated to see, and what the thing I'm going to be watching for over the next couple of months is is the opening weekend inflated? Meaning, is the multiplier going to be a pretty normal low 3x for an animated film like this? Sometimes they go to like 4 or even 5x on a regular basis for an animated films like this, way outside the range of a normal film. That's the big question for me. My guess is that it doesn't push past 3.5x as a multiplier, just because the opening weekend does feel really inflated and a little bit front-loaded probably. So that's my take on it, but that's the thing I'm going to be looking for over the next few weeks is how does Incredibles 2, how does it lay, are its legs going to be kind of a typical A+ cinema score, which is usually over 3.5x, something like that, or is it going to sort of come down to earth a little bit? So that's what I'm going to be looking for as this movie plays out. So that was number 1 this weekend. Number 2 is Ocean's 8. Came in at just shy of $19 million for the weekend. It dropped about 54% from its opening weekend, which is pretty standard. Not a massive drop. If it had hit the high 50s or low 60s, it would be concerning. But 54% isn't really all that bad. It's a little bit middling of a drop. You would like to see something in the 40s for a movie like this, but it's pretty average, a 55% drop. Still in a ton of theaters, 4,145 theaters. Its per theater average in its second weekend was about $4,500 per theater. Its total take so far for Ocean's 8 is $78.6 million. So I don't know. This one is such a hard movie to judge or gauge its performance. I don't know why. It cost $70 million to make. I mean, let's do some cocktail napkin math on this movie. It cost $70 million to make. Worldwide costs to release this film are going to be about 3x that. So you're looking at 210. Let's just call it $200 million. That's to release it on all platforms in all regions. That means digital, that means DVD, that means streaming, all that sort of stuff, TV deals, all the marketing associated with that releasing costs, probably about $200 million. It is currently doing worldwide $115 million. But remember that, what's interesting here is the breakdown of this movie. It's so skewed towards the domestic market, which is a really strange thing these days. I think that makes sense. It might be opening on more international markets later, but now it's 68% domestic, 32% foreign in terms of the box office. If we just take some normal calculations here, I want to see what we end up. This is totally on the fly. I have no idea if this is going to make any sense, but I'm going to do it anyways. It opened at a pretty strong 41.6 million last weekend. I can assume, based on the reviews and stuff, they weren't ecstatic, but people didn't think it was a flop. So let's just give it an average 2.7 multiplier. That means it'll end up at 112. Let's just call it 115 total domestic. That's my guess. I'm not sure what its international situation is right now. It hasn't done a ton. Like I said, it's almost 70-30 split. Let's assume that it's going to open a lot more international markets. Let's assume maybe I don't even know, a 55. I'm being really generous right now. 55-45 split. So what that basically means, that 115 domestic total will be 55% of its total take. So let's see what that would give us as a total. You're looking at 210-ish total worldwide take. Now, normally, if you can follow this is all, and all this information and the sort of formulas I'm throwing out there, they're not really written down by anybody, but if you take a look at Deadline's most profitable movie data sets from 2014 through now, I actually have not added 2017 yet. I just reminded myself of that. I should do that tonight. There's patterns that show up. So I'm using those patterns to sort of extrapolate on how much a movie is going to be profitable, or if it's going to be profitable. Is it perfect? No. Is it ballpark? Yes. So don't take this as gospel. This is not the word of God in terms of box office profit and box office and movie financials, but it gives us a general idea of how well a movie's doing. So total costs are going to be about 3x the production budget, just in general. And again, total cost, every single platform the film's going to be released on in every single region. Right, so people really look at that. They're like, "Oh, it's only the production budget's only a third." Yeah, that's how it works nowadays. I mean, that's just, it is what it is. So I'm getting kind of $200-ish million total take worldwide. That might be skewed a little bit downward, and I'm looking at about $200 million total releasing costs. Here's the issue: is that what a movie makes worldwide is not real revenue. Right, so in the United States, a movie makes about 50% of its box office that goes to the studio. The other 50% goes to the movie theater. Pretty a split right down the middle. In other regions, internationally in general, Usually it's considered about 40% goes to the studio, and in places like China it's a lot lower, where it's like 25% will go back to the studio. So if a movie makes $100 million in China, it's only actually making 25%, or 25 million. 75 million of that's going to the Chinese movie theaters and distributors. So I think this one, what I'm seeing now, I don't know. Maybe my international number's way off. But in general, a wide release like this is going to make about 87 to 90% of its worldwide box office back as revenue for the studio. And that would be, that's not just the box office. That's like VOD, that's TV deals, that's streaming. And again, this all comes from Deadline. So if you don't agree with this or think it's stupid, deal with them. I'm just taking their data and making formulas out of it. So let's just say it does 88% of its worldwide box office and total revenue. You're looking at a little bit of a loss here. Now, there's a lot of finagling that goes on with these movies in the background. Like maybe they cut the VOD budget, maybe they cut the DVD budget or something, the marketing budgets and stuff like that. They find ways to make money. Obviously, their financial plans are constantly dynamic. But very general ballpark, Ocean's 8 is performing on sort of a very close to break-even level. It's certainly not going to make a massive profit. It might make a little bit of profit if they can organize these revenue streams and cost well. But it's not a breakout hit, and it's not really a flop. It's kind of riding that line of break even. And so that gives you kind of a general idea of how it's doing. I thought that $41 million opening last week was really good, but it has a high production budget. And for whatever reason, it's just not. And this may be, I gotta double check and see how many places it's open internationally, because that's really confusing me. Okay, this makes a little bit more sense. So it hasn't opened a ton of places on the foreign markets, and I'm not really sure why. It's probably opened in about 20 different countries. So, my international number and guess is probably a little bit low. So I think it's probably more in the break-even, low-profit category. It's definitely not in a breakout category, and it's certainly not in a flop category. It's not even really underperforming. I think it's a little bit of a net positive here for Warner Brothers. But we'll know more once it opens up in a lot more foreign international markets. But in the second weekend, not bad. A pretty standard drop of 54%. So we'll see how that plays out. I expect similar drops moving forward. But I'll keep a closer eye at the international take of this movie. Because if it doesn't do really well internationally, there's a possibility that it doesn't really make any money at all. So something that we will watch. Okay, so that was number 2. Number 3 was a really strange movie. Tag. I guess it's like a game of tag. I don't know what happens. Like this movie, the trailer dropped like 4 or 5 months ago. I saw the trailer and I was like, noted, rated R comedy, one of the genres I am most fascinated in from the business perspective. Let's see how this thing does. So it opened up at just shy of $15 million this weekend. Rated R comedy from Warner Brothers. It's about a group of people, adults, that have been playing tag, a game of tag, for like forever. And whatever. They live their own lives, and all of a sudden, someone shows up and tags them. That's essentially what it's all about. Didn't have a super wide release. About 3,400 theaters. Per theater average was $4,400. Production budget on this was $28 million. Not really a massive opening. And kind of a depressed opening for the summer season in a movie like this. I don't know what happened with the marketing. The marketing was somewhat strong when that trailer first dropped, and then it felt like the marketing almost completely disappeared up until the release of the movie. I have not seen a single ad, a single trailer, and I'm pretty sure I'm the direct demographic for this film. 30-something male. It just seems like this movie is probably marketed to someone just like me. So it's a little bit strange that I've seen basically zero marketing for it. And also I follow a lot of movie forums, and I'm always on the Reddit with movies and box office forums and stuff like that. Nothing, no mentions of it whatsoever. So a really eerily silent marketing campaign for this film. So it opens at $15 million. Let's take a look and see what it did in terms of quality wise. 58% on Rotten Tomatoes, which isn't like obviously rotten, obviously not a good score, but rated R comedies and comedies in general tend to not score very well from critics on this. Top critics gave it a 45%. It's getting worse. Audience score was 71%. B plus cinema score, which isn't terrible. Very, very, very average score. Okay, so what does this mean? Where is this going? It's really not going to go probably anywhere all that much. like 15 million, probably at best 3x multiplier, looking at 45 million bucks total, which is not a great take. And let's look up, in terms of like, it's a rated R comedy. That's been a big topic of this podcast for a long time. If you kind of look over what's been going on with rated R comedies the last few years, it's been a genre that, to give you a brief recap, had a boom starting around 2003 and into the mid 2000s. The oddies, the naughties, if you will, really peaked and had a great run in terms of box office success, but also in terms of cultural relevance. Like these, I'm thinking about the Judd Apatow movies and the sort of related universe, like something like Superbad came out in 2007, not only a really big box office smash hit, but also probably one of the better comedies to come out that decade. And so it was just a real renaissance and revitalization of the rated R comedy genre. And since then, it's been a weird trip downwards. The last 2 years have seen a lot of flops in this rated R comedy genre. You take a look at stuff like Snatched, which only did 45 million bucks domestically. Baywatch was a pretty massive flop at 58 million bucks last year. Why Him came out last Christmas, or 2 Christmases ago. $60 million total. Office Christmas Party, same Christmas period, $54 million. We haven't really had anything break the $100 million mark, which was something that seemed to happen pretty often before, besides Girls Trip, which was everybody had cinema score of an A+, I think, or maybe an A. I get hyperbolic sometimes. And Bad Moms. So female group rated R comedies, those are the ones that seem to do okay. But everything else is really struggling. More recently, Bad Moms Christmas did $72 million this last Christmas season. Game Night and Blockers both came out this year, rated R comedies. I thought both of them looked pretty decent. Game Night ended up at 68 so far. And Blockers is sitting at 59 million bucks about 2 months after it opened. So that's pretty much the end of the run for both those movies. So this is going to fall pretty far below that. It's kind of going to be in the Snatched range, about 45 million bucks. War Dogs was 43 million bucks. So it's in the Mike and Dave Need a Wedding Date came out July of 2016. That did about 46 million bucks domestically. So Tag seems it's going to be in that underperforming sort of tier of these movies. I'm looking at this now, like I just did this data set recently. If you're really interested in this stuff, Box Office Mojo is a fantastic site to peruse and browse. If you want to run a report and find out specific information, go to thenumbers.com. It's a much better way or website where you can actually, I built this as a report. It's almost like a SQL report if you're into super nerd or Excel stuff. So I built this report. I just basically looked at rated R comedies that have opened over $10 million. It's opening weekend. And I'm looking at the list now, and it's fascinating because the last 3 rated R comedy movies that have done over $100 million in the domestic box office, they're all female-centric. I talked about Girls Trip. I talked about Bad Moms. The one before that was Trainwreck. And then the one before that was Spy, which is mostly female-centric, too. The last sort of male one was 22 Jump Street in 4 years ago in June 2014. I find that so... I mean, I could write a whole book on this. I'm not going to... There's like a level of nerd that I could go to that I know that any sort of listener, despite how much you're into the box office, does not want to go to. And I get that, and I respect that. But the last time rated R comedies were almost like a sure bet was the 2014 era. 22 Jump Street did 191. Neighbors in 2014 did 150. Anchorman 2, despite the fact that it's a terrible movie, did 127. Jackass Bad Grandpa did 102. You just had like 2013 was really the last time you could really count on these movies to make $100 million. Hangover 3, This Is the End, The Heat, We Are the Millers. How did We Are the Millers make $150 million? I still do not understand that at all. So the sort of collapse of the rated R comedy continues. Not that this opening's terrible. It's just not good enough to get studios excited to make other movies like this. I've seen Blockers. It's okay. I've seen Game Night. It's okay. Think about the bigger flops from last year. The House. I mean, what the hell happened there? So the genre just continues to struggle a bit. If I was a studio and I saw these numbers, I'd be like, give me a group of women and let's make a rated R comedy about them, and it's probably going to do pretty well. It's a lot better bet than what they've been trying recently. So, and it's interesting, this one is specifically about a group of guys. Flops. Hey, you can't argue with that, all right? Okay, so that's Tag. It's not doing very well. Continues the trend of rated R comedies flopping a lot, unless it's led by a group of women. Okay, so that was number 3 this weekend. Let's keep this train rolling. Number 4 was our lovely massive flop, Solo, A Star Wars Story. Did $10 million. Had a good drop, though. 37% drop. Wow, it lost 1,100 theaters. Not good. Per theater average was just north of $3,000 per theater. Its total take so far is $193 million, which is what some people thought it was going to open at on its opening weekend. I've talked a ton about Star Wars and Solo. I don't want to talk about it that much anymore. That's a good drop, but the write-off here is going to be just unbelievably large. The production budget was pushing $350. I've heard maybe even higher. There's no way they're going to recoup their money on this performance, and internationally has been even worse. I don't know. There's like a weird culture surrounding the Star Wars stuff. I've talked about it at length, but I don't know where Solo really fits into that story. I know with Last Jedi, there was this odd sort of reaction to the film that was just negative, but with a sense of viciousness to it. I didn't understand that. One of the stars recently had to leave social media because there was so many trolls and sort of alt-right neo-Nazi types who were attacking her. I kind of do wonder if in a weird way that alt-right bro-ish culture, I just call them neo-Nazis because that's what they are. They pretend they're something else, but they're all neo-Nazis and white supremacists. There's something about that culture that may have affected Solo in a way, and I'm not sure how significant it would be. But obviously, I talked about this movie, like, people didn't really ask for it. It didn't look very good. Behind the scenes drama, it was just like a perfect storm of negativity surrounding that film that it almost like it couldn't succeed. Like, especially opening when they didn't push it back to December or August. Just terrible decisions by Disney on this one. But I kind of do wonder if that sort of alt-right culture didn't have some sort of effect on just tarnishing Star Wars in general and making people hate it in a way. I don't know. I'm talking on my ass, but I think there's definitely something there. I'm a political junkie as well. I should have a political podcast, but there's definitely something there about the culture surrounding Star Wars, and it's so toxic and so much negativity that I don't think I don't think that helped Solo at all. I guess is what I'm saying. So it's not doing very well. It's a big flop. 36% drops, decent, but it's not going to save that movie. Number 5 this weekend was Deadpool 2. 38%, 37% drop. Actually, I'm sorry. It's 39% drop. I want to have some integrity here. 8.6, almost 8.7 million on the weekend. Lost 600 theaters. Per theater average, it's dropped below 3,000 to about $2,700. Total take so far for Deadpool 2 is $294 million. I think the overall performance of Deadpool 2 is also hard to pin down. The one thing it has going for it is it had a pretty low production budget, only $110 million. Normally movies like this, big, massive MCU type comic movies, go well into $200 million in terms of production budget. But I think the performance is good. Like, I don't think there's any reason to sort of talk negatively about its performance. I do feel like it was expected to do more than it did overall. It didn't necessarily have the massive breakout effect that the original did. The original ended up at 363, adjusted goes 387. So it's probably not going to get that close to the first one. But it's playing a lot better. It had a really, really big drop its first weekend out. Remember, it dropped 65% in its second weekend. And I was sort of the naysayer. Oh, no, it's not going to make $300 million. Like, this is chaotic. And of course, I was wrong. It played out a little bit more like a Spider-Man Homecoming, which had a second weekend massive drop. But then the drops started to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's what's happened here. And its third weekend, it dropped 46%. From that 65% the weekend before. Then it dropped 39% last weekend. This weekend it dropped just shy of 39%. So it's having a nice, good, gradual sort of I guess you would call it a descent. It's more like its swan song is going very well, if not slow. So it's not going to really disappear all that much anytime soon from the multiplex. But it's not probably going to hit the original, which I think to Fox is a little bit, just a tiny bit disappointing. But it's going to make a lot of money profit-wise. I'm not sure how it's doing internationally. Let's take a look at that really quick, just for a frame of reference. It's done $395 foreign. Total take so far overall is $689. Yeah, this thing is printing money. So maybe a super, super slight underperformance from the domestic market, just in terms of expectation. It's still going to make a massive profit just domestically alone. So I think it's a big win for Fox, and we'll see how it plays out over the next few weeks. We had a new opener at number 6, Superfly, from Sony Columbia. I didn't know anything about this movie. I still don't know anything about this movie. It opened pretty poor, 6.8, almost 6.9 million. Kind of a weird number of theaters, just over 2,200 theaters for an opening weekend. Per theater average was over 3,000, just about $3,100 per theater. I don't know anything about this. It had a super low production budget of $16 million. So maybe it finds a way to recoup, but this is a pretty bad wide release opening. If you're just pushing $3,000 on only like 2,300 theaters, something went pretty wrong here. To me, there was zero marketing that I saw about this. I wasn't even aware it was coming out until I saw it on the release schedule. So I think either got buried or they were doing a super targeted demographic for the marketing on this. They failed. And this thing's not going to make any money whatsoever. The only saving grace is that it has a super, very low production budget. Cinema score was B+, so it wasn't like artistically a disaster. 53% Rotten Tomatoes. Ouch, not very good from critics. 66 score from Rotten Tomatoes users. Also not good. I kind of want to read the critical consensus here. Superfly updates the blaxploitation original, I can't speak, sorry, with a stylish remake that's short on social subtext, but still exciting and visually arresting enough to offer its own sickly staged action rewards. Interesting. So obviously it's a remake. I'm not sure why they didn't give it the full court press in terms of marketing, because it's clear that they didn't do that. Any movie that opens under 2,500 theaters wide release, something they don't expect it to do very well, so they're not going to push it that hard. That's what happened with Superfly. I expect that one to drop massively in its second weekend. Anyway, okay, so let's move on. Number 7 was Hereditary from A24, a movie that I love to talk about, and it's one of those movies that if you've seen it, you're in like this club, and like all you want to do is talk about the movie because it's so bonkers and it's so weird, and I still can't tell if it's amazing. I can't tell if it's a masterpiece or one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life. I still have no idea. I can't fall on one side or the other. But it did decently well this weekend. Normally, a horror film is going to drop pretty severely its second weekend. You're talking over 60% is kind of the norm for horror films. For whatever reason, people won't rush out to see them opening weekend and just disappear in the second weekend. So it did 6.8 million, a 49% drop, which was really, really good for a horror film. Actually added 34 theaters in the second weekend. Not great though. Per theater average 22, almost 2,300. Total take so far is $27 million. I had a sort of at length rant about this movie last weekend when I saw it. I don't know how this is going to play long term. And what I mean by that is this is a good performance financially. A24, Deadline even says this, like other distributors are really impressed by this performance by a little bit more of an upstart, smaller indie distributor like A24. I'm sure they're very excited about it and very happy. My concern would be it felt like a bait and switch. As somebody who is not only a horror fan but also an art film fan, I love experimental stuff. I like being disturbed. I like seeing something new and edgy. I walked out of the theater really pissed off about this movie. And a lot of the friends that I've talked to have felt the same way. And just in general, like the reactions online from people, that you can't argue against that D+ cinema score. Like something didn't go right here. You advertised this movie a certain way. The people you advertised to were excited. They showed up and they absolutely hated it. And so there was something didn't go right here. Financially, it's made $27 million. I don't know how it's going to play the long term, but it's going to be A24's one of their best movies. I got to take a look at their all-time list here. They're so new that they don't have a ton of films out, but you've heard of most of them because they're artistically, they are, I think, the creme de la creme of American film right now. Lady Bird, Moonlight, Ex Machina, The Witch, Disaster Artist, Room, Spring Breakers, It Comes at Night, The Lobster, The Spectacular Now, Florida Project. There's a lot of other films, Swiss Army Man, Green Room. There's a lot that they've put out. Some of it has been artistically masterful. Like Moonlight, I would say Lady Bird is pretty close to that quality too. Moneymakers, they are not. Hereditary is already about to become number 2. It's basically matched what Moonlight did. And Moonlight won Best Picture. Stole it from La La Land, literally. So financially, it seems like an awesome success for a small new company. I just don't like how they got there. And I don't want to say it's like dirty or anything like that, but like they could have marketed this so well in a different way, and they chose a very traditional, very straightforward horror movie. It's the scariest movie you've seen since The Exorcist, or it's this generation's Rosemary's Baby. It felt so kind of cheap on some level, and a lot of people felt cheated after seeing it. So that's going to negatively affect its VOD revenues, its digital sales revenue, EST, electric sell-through, and on down. And that will lower its streaming price. It's like that. So I don't know. I think they got like a win, but probably not in the best way, or probably not how they should have. And I'm sure they don't give a fuck. Whatever. But I'm telling you, from somebody who works in marketing and customer experience, this was a super negative experience for a lot of people. And that hurts the A24 brand on a whole. Now, anytime someone sees A24 and they saw Hereditary and hated it, it's like a bad customer experience. And that can play out for years. So it may be a win, but on the same level, I think they have turned off a lot of the general audiences who maybe should never have seen this movie in the first place. I would have opted for an art film release for this. And maybe you don't make $27 million. Maybe you make a lot more. Maybe this plays in New York and Los Angeles for a month. You get people absolutely super hyped about it, and then you can kind of take it on a road show. But maybe they don't do that anymore. I don't know. I love the fact that it's done well because it's such an interesting, strange horror film. I just don't like the fact that a lot of people felt gypped and hated the movie. I mean, it's as simple as that. And so that was number 7 for the weekend with $7 million essentially. Number 8, Avengers Infinity War is still around, folks. It hasn't gone anywhere. And its 8th weekend, 5.4 million, only dropped 25%, lost 700 theaters. Per theater average was higher than Hereditary. Think about that. In its 8th weekend. $2,500 for Avengers Infinity War's per theater average. Total takes so far is $664. Where does that put that on the all-time list? Let's take a look. It is now has passed Titanic. It passed Titanic this weekend. It is now below Black Panther. Black Panther ended up at $699. For whatever reason, they couldn't get it to go above 700. Didn't hit the 700 mark. Maybe it does soon. Avengers Infinity War is at 664, so it's about 30 back. Not going to make up the ground on that, I don't think. So it should be number 4 all time for the time being. So number 9 this weekend was Adrift from STX. That is harsh. 58% drop in its 3rd weekend. That is not good. $2.2 million on the weekend. Lost over 1,000 theaters. This thing is done. Per theater average was an anemic $1,100. It has done about $27 million so far on the domestic market. This one, I just feel like I've heard a couple people who've seen it. They talked to me about it. Like, oh, it's pretty good. It's not bad. Based on a true story, survival story, stuck in a boat, all that sort of jazz. This one just didn't feel like it was marketed appropriately. There wasn't enough ad dollars behind it. It didn't seem that out there on social media or online, on Twitter, whatever. It just seemed like they did not market this well. The actual movie itself seems like it's okay. 70% Rotten Tomatoes, audience score of something. Computer like breaks down if I want to see something. 73% Rotten Tomatoes. Critic consensus, here we go, trying to read again. Adrift sails smoothly between love story and survival drama, thanks in large part to a gripping central performance from Woodley. So, kind of an okay movie. I just feel like it could have done a lot better. I don't know. It seems like it's underperforming to me just because STX doesn't really get how to release movies still. They've been around for a while and they still just don't get it. I could, like, the moment I see a trailer, I was like, this looks like an STX trailer. It's just like, it's just maybe like a step above direct VOD marketing. It's not good enough. It's not polished enough. And that really, really affects how these movies do. Anyway, that was Adrift. Number 10 to close out the top 10 was Book Club, 1.8 million. Kind of a high drop for Book Club, 57%. That's because it lost a lot of theaters. It lost about 1,150 theaters. Per theater average was only $1,100. Wow, what were old people doing this weekend? Book Club just, it's like tanking right at the end. It's like Book Club is running a marathon to $70 million, and then it just, like, the last lap, the legs just drop out from underneath it. That's essentially what's happening. It is stuck at about $62 million. It's going nowhere, though. With $1,100 per theater average and losing over 1,000 theaters, that thing is done. But it doesn't matter because it picked up $62 million so far. Probably closes out, 65-ish, maybe high 60s. Really fantastic performance for that movie. It just is a little bit odd that it just dropped off out of nowhere in its fifth weekend. Any event, so that's the top 10, guys. Big stories are Incredibles 2, record breaker, top 10 all-time opening weekend. Brad Bird gets his revenge for Tomorrowland. Rated R comedies are still sort of floundering. Tag opened at 15, probably closes at 45, not even breaking the $50 million mark probably. So rated R comedies still not taking off after years of sort of being depressed. Superfly was a big flop, even though it didn't cost that much. Deadpool had a good drop. Solo had a good drop. Hereditary had a great drop for a horror film. We'll see how that one ends up. And then outside the top 10, you had stuff like Gotti, which I'm not even sure why it was released in theaters. MoviePass claims that 41% of the revenue for Gotti was driven by their users. I don't believe that. That seems like it's like way too high. I mean, it's true. It did 1.7 million, opened in 503 theaters. Per theater average on its opening weekend was $3,400. Absolutely terrible. That movie's going nowhere. Race 3 opened up at number 3 this weekend on 300 theaters. Per theater average is okay. 53.85. I'm not sure what this one is all about. It looks like it might be it's a Bollywood film, it looks like. So kind of a limited specific demographic for that one. That is the top 10 with a couple extras. Wrinkle in Time is just about to pass $100 million, but it's still a huge flop. Won't You Be My Neighbor, which is the documentary on Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, that did 1.7 million. The real key for this one is per theater average. Pretty strong per theater average. It's been 100 theaters right now. Per theater average is over 10K. It's about $10,500 per theater. Did $1 million this weekend. I think that one is going to be like another Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which has done over $10 million, which is an amazing performance from Magnolia Films on that movie. I feel like Won't You Be My Neighbor is going to do better than that. At least 10 million. I'm looking at 15, maybe 20 million bucks. Who doesn't love Mr. Rogers? So that's a limited release. Is there any other thing? I love that I just clucked. If you saw Hereditary, you know what I'm talking about. There's nothing else that really sticks out to me all that much. Upgrade is still hanging around. Okay, and the top 20, let's look at the lowest per theater averages. The lowest is going to be Hotel Artemis, which just tanked massively. $438 per theater this weekend. Coming in at number 2 for the lowest per theater average is going to be Life of the Party, and its sixth weekend. $737 per theater. You know, you can obviously tell. This is why I talk about per theater averages a lot. It pretty much dictates how a movie's going to do, and it gives you a really good kind of sign or of its life or the pulse of the movie and how it's doing. And obviously, opening weekend is going to be the highest, but as it sort of gradually descends over its third, fourth, fifth weekend, that per theater average, once it gets below a certain point, I call the Mendoza line for wide releases about 2,000. Once you get below 2,000, you're probably going to be dropping out of the top 10, and you're probably going to start losing a lot of theaters. And the moment you start losing a lot of theaters, that's like you're going to be DOA pretty soon and kicked out, and that's kind of the end of the box office run. But you look outside the top 10 of the top 20, you see a lot of movies that are on their deathbed. Overboard, Breaking In. What else? Obviously, Wrinkle in Time. Why did Wrinkle in Time add 88 theaters last weekend? I don't know. It's been out for 15 weeks. Okay, that's enough about the top 10 and some random asides about the top 20. Let's take a look at what's going on over the next couple of weekends here. Coming up this weekend is a big one, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. I'm really excited for this one and how it's going to do. This is one of those movies where I'm definitely going to follow all the nerds in the forums and see what they're saying as the numbers pop in. There's like some like insider sources on these forums that release number is like Friday night. We'll get the actual Friday night number. So I'm gonna follow that. It's an exciting movie because the last one was tracking so low, and then it broke the record for opening weekend. This one, I think, is going to be the reverse sort of interest and pull. I feel like this one is tracking 130 to 150, which is like $50-60 million less than the original. So already it's tanking, right? I get the feeling that it could even be a lot worse than that. There's this weird part of me that says it's going to open on $100 million. That's probably not true, and I'm probably an idiot for saying that. But it just doesn't seem like there's any limit to how terrible this movie is going to do. So I'm really excited to follow that one. Not that I wanted to see it fail, but the critics hate it. It looks awful. The trailers have been trash. Remember the first trailer was basically like a 30-second promo for Budweiser in the first part? That's just so insulting to the audience. Disgusting. The weekend after that, it's the end of June here. You're looking at Sicario, Day of Soldado. You're looking at Uncle Drew. I feel like Uncle Drew's going to do really well. That's just my gut feeling. I saw that trailer. I was like, this is an interesting movie. I think it's going to connect especially with people under 25 and under 18. So I think that one's going to do pretty well. Sicario, Day of Soldado, I don't know. The border stuff right now in the United States politically, sorry to bring in politics again, has gotten to this really weird, really eerie state that I don't think I've ever experienced before being in America. It's really dividing people and upsetting people in a way that I don't think I've ever seen before. The last time I saw this people upset was a long time ago. And so that movie sort of takes place down in Mexico. It's about the border, and I don't know. I feel like that's really going to hurt that movie. I thought it was going to break out, but now with the stuff going on and the kids being held in detention centers, I don't think it's going to do all that well anymore. It's just too raw of a topic for a lot of people. So I feel like that the previous prediction that was going to break out, I think it's not going to happen anymore. And that ends June. And Incredibles 2 is basically going to own June, which I thought it was going to do. Then we're into July. You're looking at The First Purge, comes out on July 4th. That one looks exciting and fun. Then you have Ant-Man and the Wasp. The reactions to that movie are just getting really kind of weird. Like I was posting on some forum about, its tracking is pretty low. Tracking for that's looking at like, I think $70 million, right around there. No, the original opened at 45, closed out at 180. So that seems like it's pretty good. But compared to the rest of the MCU universe, MCU is almost guaranteed 100 million plus opening now. I mean, look at Black Panther, look at Avengers Infinity War, look at Thor. So the fact that that's only going to open at 70, I don't know, it just seems kind of weird. And then people are like getting defensive about it, like MCU fanboys, of course. Like, oh, it's fine. It's Ant-Man. The original Ant-Man opened at 55, so it's an improvement. I was like, no, that doesn't really make any sense to me. There's no reason why Ant-Man and the Wasp doesn't open to 120, 130. If it doesn't, there's something kind of weird about it. Like maybe it wasn't a really good idea to do a sequel for that movie. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I'm sure they're going to make a ton of money on it, but if it like opens at 70 or 60 and only does like 3x and ends up below 200, that's not good at all. That might be one of the first MCU flops ever since like the Hulk. But I absolutely doubt that's going to happen. But we will watch on that one. Then we get really deep into this summer. Hotel Transylvania 3, Summer Vacation comes out on July 13th. Skyscraper comes out. That should be a fun romp on July 13th as well. The 20th, you got Equalizer 2, Mamma Mia, sequel, Here We Go Again. Unfriended Dark Web from BH Tilt. And then you close out July with Mission Impossible Fallout. Teen Titans Go to the Movies. I have no idea what the hell that is. This has to be one of the weirdest summers ever. There's just like this, it just doesn't really feel like summer yet. Like, I don't know why. Like, maybe it's when Jurassic World comes out, it'll feel like summer. But after that, then you have Ant-Man 2 weeks later. And that's kind of it. Skyscraper feels like an August release. Why is that coming out in July? I got to take a briefly look at August to see if there's anything, if summer's going to be redeemed somehow. There's a ton of movies coming out August 3rd. None of them look like very good movies. Dog Days? What the hell is this? The Meg definitely seems like an August release. And that's kind of like, Slenderman comes out on the 24th of August. It's a really quiet summer, which is why I think Incredibles 2 has done so well. It's going to do really, really well because there's just not a ton coming out. Besides Jurassic World, Mission Impossible, and like Meg, Skyscraper doesn't count. There's not really a lot of tentpoles. So it's a pretty quiet summer overall. But that's it for now, guys. Thanks for listening. I will be back next week, and this has been the Wildline Podcast.